My name is Rosalind. At 21 years old, standing in my Royal Air Force dress uniform at RAF Bryce Norton, I thought I had finally clawed my way out of a nightmare. The promotion ceremony, the stage, the recognition. It was supposed to be the moment that proved I was more than the forgotten shadow my family in Cambridge had worked so hard to keep me. But then he walked in. Sebastian didn't belong there. He wore jeans and an unremarkable grey shirt, a deliberate insult to everything the uniform represented. He moved with the predatory grace of someone hunting, his eyes locked on mine with the same searing hatred I'd known since childhood. Before anyone could stop him, before I could even comprehend what was happening, he reached the stage. His knee drove upward with brutal efficiency. The pain was white-hot, searing through my abdomen. And then came the warm gush of blood spreading across my uniform. Crimson against white, a stain that meant far more than just physical injury. The child I was carrying, my secret, fragile hope, was dying on the stage of my greatest triumph. I looked to my mother for salvation. She simply stared at the floor, her face a mask of willful blindness. That's when Sebastian roared. She deserved it. She's a disgrace to this family. They thought they had crushed my future. They didn't know they were about to awaken something far more dangerous than hope. They were about to awaken a warrior. Before we jump into today's story, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? Take a second and let me know in the comments. Alright, let's get into this. The air inside the RAF officers' hall at Bryce Norton was thick with ceremony and pride. It hung there like a tangible force, a blend of polished brass, starched fabric, and the collective dignity of the Royal Air Force. I stood at attention in my dress uniform, the sharp blue-grey service jacket pressed to razor-perfect creases, the buttons gleaming like small mirrors. On my collar, the RAF insignia felt heavier than metal. It felt like proof, like worth. This was the culmination of everything. The relentless nights studying regulations until my eyes burned. The endless training marches across the windswept grounds of HMS Raleigh in Cornwall. Every roared command from the drill sergeants, every obstacle, every moment of pain had been a chisel, sculpting away the frightened, unwanted girl from Cambridge and revealing the officer underneath. My stepfather, Colonel Edmund Radcliffe, a man who viewed the RAF with barely concealed disdain, had said I'd never make it. "You haven't got the steel for it, Rosalind," he'd sneered over dinner. "You're not built for discipline." Now I was about to be promoted to flight lieutenant. The announcement echoed through the hall. A wave of applause rippled through the assembly. This was mine. This identity, this rank, this achievement. No one could take it from me. As I walked toward the stage, my eyes scanned the front row. My mother, Margaret, sat rigid beside Edmund. I searched her face for the smallest flicker of pride. What I found was a stiff, barely perceptible nod. Edmund's gaze didn't even turn my direction. His jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle working. The familiar sting of disappointment came and went. It didn't matter. This moment belonged to me. But as I reached the commanding officer, movement at the side entrance caught my eye. Sebastian. He was my stepbrother, the golden boy of the Radcliffe family, the one for whom the world had always bent itself into accommodating shapes. He wasn't in a suit or formal wear. He wore those faded jeans and that grey shirt deliberately, a calculated act of contempt. He slouched against the doorframe, arms crossed, a contemptuous smirk twisting his lips. His eyes found mine and my blood ran cold. It was the same look he'd given me when I was 8 years old, right before he'd snapped the arm off my favourite doll, just to see me cry. The same look from a dozen moments of casual cruelty, each one designed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. He pushed off from the wall and started walking, not toward the seating area, but directly toward the stage. A few heads turned in confusion. My commanding officer's hand hesitated over the new insignia. Sebastian moved with predatory purpose, his eyes never leaving mine. He mounted the stage steps in 2 quick strides. The hall fell silent. There was no shouting, no argument, just his focused, hateful advance. Time seemed to stretch and thin, and all I could hear was the frantic hammering of my own heart. Then it happened. His motion was brutally efficient. There was no preamble, no warning. He closed the distance and drove his knee hard into my abdomen. The air was violently forced from my lungs. I made a sound I'd never heard myself make before. A guttural sound of total shock and agony. The pain was blinding, a white-hot explosion that felt like my insides were being crushed. My vision swam. My knees buckled. I crumpled to the polished floor. my white cap tumbling away, and then came the new sensation. Warm wetness spreading through my uniform. I looked down. A dark stain was blossoming against the pristine white of my ceremonial belt, a horrifying crimson flower. It wasn't just blood. It was everything I'd been carrying in secret. My tiny, fragile hope, my future. Spilling out onto the stage of my greatest achievement, through the haze of pain, my eyes desperately sought my mother's face. She turned her head and stared at the floor. She abandoned me. In that single moment of cruelty, she chose her allegiance, and it was not to her daughter. At my side, I saw Edmund. He wasn't looking at Sebastian with rage. His hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists, his expression one of pure fury. But it was directed at me. He was angry that I had caused this scene. The auditorium erupted into shocked gasps, then a stunned, suffocating silence. Sebastian's voice shattered the stillness like broken glass. She deserved it. She's a disgrace to this family. But then Air Commodore James Pemberton, the base commander, moved with decisive speed. His sharp eyes fixed on me for a moment, then on his officers. His voice cut through the tension like cold steel. This is an assault on a Royal Air Force officer on active duty. Secure the suspect. Medical team to the stage now. The MPs converged on Sebastian. Air Commodore Pemberton's gaze returned to me, his expression unreadable but his voice unwavering. We have an officer down. Not a family problem. An officer. You belong to the RAF now, Flight Lieutenant, and the RAF takes care of its own. In that moment of absolute betrayal by blood, those words were a lifeline. They were a declaration that I belonged to a different family now. A family bound not by DNA, but by a code far older and far more honorable. The hospital room was a blank canvas of white walls and the rhythmic beep of machines. Memory, unwilling and cruel, began to paint itself across that emptiness. The attack hadn't just broken my body. It had shattered a carefully sealed door in my mind, releasing a flood of ghosts I'd spent years trying to bury. The most vivid ghost was from my A-level graduation ceremony, when I'd been named top student in a cohort of over 400. I'd poured myself into that achievement, driven by a desperate need to create a success so undeniable, so public, that even Edmund would be forced to acknowledge it. Standing on that podium, looking out at the assembled faces, I saw my mother dabbing at her eyes. For one fragile, foolish moment, hope ignited in my chest. This is it. This is the moment they finally see me. The hope lasted exactly as long as it took to drive home. The back garden was in full celebration. But the balloons weren't in my school colours. They were Sebastian's team colours. A massive banner stretched between the oak trees read, "Congratulations to our future champion." Edmund had his arm around Sebastian, holding court with his friends, his voice booming across the lawn. Full scholarship to university. The scouts are calling already. My son is going to be extraordinary. All the energy, all the attention, all the pride was a whirlpool spinning around Sebastian. My mother pressed a heavy plastic tray into my hands. "Rosalind, darling, could you bring drinks around? The guests are getting thirsty." In the simple white dress I'd bought myself, I was demoted from guest of honor to catering staff at my own graduation party. As I navigated the crowded lawn with sweating glasses of fruit punch, the sweet, cloying smell transported me back to another party, another humiliation Thanksgiving. 2 years earlier, the entire extended family gathered around a gleaming dining room table, laden with roasted turkey, stuffing, potatoes, and my mother's famous cranberry sauce. I'd just served myself a slice of turkey when Sebastian leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. A slow, malicious smirk spread across his face. Then he did it. He hawked and spat, a thick, disgusting glob of saliva that sailed across the table and landed squarely on the turkey on my plate. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth, every muscle in my body paralyzed with shock and disgust. Edmund laughed. Actually laughed. A great booming laugh that shook his entire body. "Just adding a little flavor, Rosalind." My mother's face went pale. She shot out of her chair and snatched my plate, but not to confront Sebastian. She leaned down, her voice a frantic whisper in my ear. "Don't make a scene, Rosalind. For God's sake, just let it go." She was more terrified of social disruption than outraged by her son's vile degradation of her daughter. The memory made me shudder there in the back garden, causing the glasses on my tray to rattle. Jacob and his friends swaggered past me. He didn't even look at me. He just jutted his hip, a casual, deliberate motion that sent my tray tilting. Bright red punch cascaded down the front of my white dress. "Oops, clumsy," he sneered, flashing that same smirk. Edmund's voice cut across the lawn. "Rosalind, get that cleaned up. Don't you dare ruin your brother's party." Standing there, frozen, dripping in red that looked like blood against white fabric, I finally understood something that had been whispered in my mind for years. In their eyes, I was not a person to be celebrated. I was something to be stained. A background character whose only purpose was to make their golden boy shine brighter. That night, alone in my room, I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. The proud student from the morning was gone, replaced by a girl in a soiled dress. Her face streaked with tears she refused to let make a sound. The question that had haunted me for years finally screamed for an answer. Was there anywhere on this earth where I would be treated like a human being? The answer came when I stepped off a coach at HMS Raleigh in Cornwall. The air that hit me when the doors opened was thick, humid, and alive with the sound of the sea. Then came the human noise, screaming, raw, and ferocious from the throats of men and women in crisp RAF uniforms. "Get off the coach. You are no longer Mummy's little darlings. You belong to the Royal Air Force now." Yellow footprints were painted on the concrete. We were ordered onto them. Our civilian lives ended the second our trainers touched the paint. For the other recruits stumbling off the coach wide-eyed and terrified, it was culture shock of the highest order. For me, it was strangely familiar. I'd grown up in a house of yelling, but this was different. Edmund and Sebastian's rage was chaotic, personal, designed to break me for their amusement. This was structured. This had purpose. This wasn't about destroying me. It was about forging me into something new. The days that followed blurred into relentless cycles of deconstruction and reconstruction. Life became muscle memory. Pre-dawn runs where the world was still grey and silent, only our footsteps as rhythm. Obstacle courses under a punishing sun. Hours in the training grounds, disassembling and cleaning weapons until my hands were raw. The smell of gun oil permanently ingrained in my skin. Every muscle screamed. My lungs burned. I was being systematically broken down and remade into a functioning part of something larger. There was no Rosalind Ashworth anymore. There was only Recruit Ashworth. The ultimate test was a brutal 72-hour combat simulation designed as the final forge. With minimal food and almost no sleep, we were pushed beyond every conceivable limit. On the second night, during a forced march through brutal terrain, my body gave out, my legs buckled. I collapsed into the mud. I was done. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was ready to quit. But then two images flashed through my mind with startling clarity. Sebastian's sneering, triumphant smirk as he spat on my food. Edmund's cold, dismissive eyes as he turned away from me. A surge of white-hot anger flooded my veins. It was a fuel more potent than any food or rest. I clenched my jaw, tasting mud and grit, and forced myself back to my feet. I hefted my pack, squared my shoulders, and kept marching. The past I was running from had just become the engine that propelled me forward. Mail call was the most sacred ritual at HMS Raleigh. Each evening after final formation, our drill sergeant would walk into the barracks with a sack of letters. It was the one moment when constant tension broke. Recruits would hear their names and relief would wash over their faces. I sat on my bunk and watched my heart become a heavy stone in my chest. I had written 3 letters home to Cambridge. Short, factual notes about the training. Not begging, not complaining, just honest updates. I held on to a sliver of hope that my mother might send back a single line of encouragement. But my name was never called. The mailbox for Ashworth was always empty. The silence from Cambridge was louder than any drill sergeant's scream. One evening, Sergeant Margaret Sinclair, a tough-as-steel woman with eyes that could bore through solid granite, noticed my solitary vigil. She'd been watching me for weeks. After mail call ended, she walked over and stood before me. She didn't yell. She spoke in a low, measured voice that cut through the noise. "Ashworth," she said. "The family you're looking for isn't out there." She gestured toward the world beyond the base. "It's right here." She nodded toward the other recruits, my platoon sisters, sharing biscuits from home and reading letters aloud to each other. "This is your family now." Her words hit me harder than any physical blow. She was right. When we completed the final exercise and stood on the parade ground, exhausted and filthy but standing tall, our drill sergeants approached us with profound respect. Sergeant Sinclair stopped in front of me. In her hand, she held the sacred symbol we had bled for, the RAF eagle. She looked me straight in the eye. "Welcome to the service, Ashworth," she said, her voice thick with emotion. As she pressed the insignia into my collar, something inside me finally broke. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down my face for the first time in 13 weeks. They weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of arrival. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I was posted to RAF Norton in Oxfordshire, assigned to communications operations. The constant pressure of basic training faded, replaced by focused technical work. Value wasn't measured in how much you could endure, but in how well you did your job and how much your fellow officers could count on you. It was in this quieter environment that I cautiously unfurled parts of myself I'd kept locked down for years. I met Louise, a fast-talking, perpetually cheerful officer from a small town in Yorkshire who put hot sauce on everything and wasn't afraid to tell a commanding officer he was wrong. And Thomas, a quiet, steady guy from rural Wales who could fix anything with a Leatherman and improvisation. He spoke in half sentences, but communicated more with a single nod than most people could with a full speech. They were my team. They didn't ask about my family or where I came from. In the service, your past matters less than your present performance. They accepted me for who I was, quiet, diligent, utterly reliable. For the first time, I was part of a group where my worth was simply a given. My 21st birthday fell on a Tuesday. I didn't mention it to anyone. That evening, when I pushed open the door to my room, it was pitch black. The light switch didn't work. My training kicked in instantly. I dropped into a defensive crouch, my body tensing. Suddenly, the lights flickered on. Standing in the middle of the room were Louise, Thomas, and a handful of other officers. They were huddled around a box from a local pizzeria, in the middle of a terribly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. I just stood there, frozen in my defensive stance, blinking like a startled animal. Louise pulled me up, laughing. "Relax, Ashworth. It's your birthday." Thomas held out a slightly lopsided cupcake with a cheap wax candle stuck in the frosting, its small flame dancing. I stared at that tiny flame and my mind went completely blank. I'd never been in a position to make a birthday wish. The sheer unexpected kindness of it was overwhelming. After I awkwardly blew out the candle, Louise handed me a small, clumsily wrapped box. "We all pitched in," she said, her usual bravado softened by genuine warmth. Inside was a simple, elegant silver bracelet. On the small metal tag attached to it, 2 words were etched, Semper Fi, always faithful. "So you remember you're never alone," Louise said, putting her hand on my shoulder. "You've always got us." That's when the dam I'd so carefully constructed inside me finally broke. I started to cry. Deep, shoulder-shaking sobs of profound gratitude. It wasn't just a bracelet, it was proof that I mattered to someone. That night, I fell asleep with the bracelet on my wrist, the cool metal a comforting weight against my skin. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and truly safe. A few months later, after a short relationship with another officer, I discovered I was pregnant. A wave of ice-cold fear washed over me, followed by something unexpected, a fierce, quiet joy. This would be my family. A tiny human being that was mine to love, mine to protect, a child who would never feel the way I had. With my promotion ceremony approaching, I decided this was the perfect moment to tell my family. Naive, desperate hope whispered that the news of a grandchild might finally bridge the chasm between us. I sent a formal invitation to Cambridge. My mother called a few days later. "Serena, I got your invitation," she said, her voice lacking any warmth. "Your stepfather and I were talking. Is such a big ceremony really necessary?" A pause, a terrible loaded pause. "Your brother Sebastian is having such a difficult time finding work. You being so successful makes him feel inferior. It's putting stress on the entire family." I couldn't process what I was hearing. "Mom, it's my promotion. It's my career." "I know that, darling," she said. And that single word, darling, was a weapon. "But family is about supporting each other. Try not to make everything about you." The call ended with her promising to see what they could do, then Sebastian called. His voice was pure venom. "So, I hear you're getting another stripe. Don't let it go to your head. That uniform doesn't make you better than anyone. You're still just the stray my mother brought home." "A stain. I'm coming to your little party," he hissed. "I'm going to show all your RAF friends exactly what you are." The line went dead. My blood ran cold. It wasn't an idle threat, it was a promise. Edmund called last. "Corporal Ashworth," he began, using my rank as an insult. "I've been informed of your condition. You have disgraced the Radcliffe name and that uniform. This is an embarrassment." My breath caught. My mother had betrayed my confidence. "I expect you to handle this problem quietly and discreetly." and you will cancel that ceremony. Do not force me to travel all the way to Oxfordshire to witness this family's humiliation. A problem. He'd called my baby a problem. Something inside me shifted. The guilt, the fear, the ingrained obedience. All of it burned away in a sudden, clarifying rage. That night, sleep was impossible. I stared at the silver bracelet on my wrist. Louise's words echoed in my mind. You're never alone. I was not that frightened girl anymore. I was an RAF officer, and an officer never goes into a fight unprepared. I made a decision. The next morning, after my shift, I went to an electronics shop in Swindon and bought a small digital voice recorder. Then I installed a call recording app on my phone. Walking back to base, the weight of the device in my pocket felt significant. It felt like the cold, reassuring weight of a weapon. I was done being a silent victim. I was done letting them control the narrative. From that moment on, every word they used against me would be recorded. The night before the ceremony, my mother called again. This time, her voice was raw panic. Rosalind, listen to me. Sebastian left a few hours ago. He's coming there. He's furious. Please, for my sake, call your commanding officer. Tell them you're ill. Just cancel the ceremony. A cold, hard calm settled over me. No, Mum, I said, my voice even. I'm not cancelling. I earned this. Why are you so stubborn? She sobbed. Why do you have to be so difficult? He's your brother. He's just hot-headed. You're going to ruin his future. You're destroying this family. Hot-headed. The word unlocked a flood of buried memories. I took a slow, deep breath. Mom, I began, my voice dangerously quiet. I was 12 when his hot-headedness pushed me down a flight of stairs. I've spent my entire life being shamed by it. Right now, I'm carrying your grandchild and you're asking me to hide. To run, to protect the man who's threatened both of us. A desperate sound came from her. He is Harold's son, Rosalind. That was it. That was the line, the final clarifying truth. It wasn't about me or Sebastian or even the baby. It was about Edmund and his need to protect his golden boy at any cost. Something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The last lingering thread of hope for a mother's love, a hope I didn't even know I was still clinging to, turned to ash. Enough, I said. I've heard enough. I ended the call. I walked into the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't frightened. She was cold, hard, and blazing with fire. Her jaw was set. Her back was straight. I wasn't looking at Rosalind Ashworth, the victim. I was looking at Flight Lieutenant Ashworth, Royal Air Force. In that instant, I realized the fatal miscalculation they'd all made. For years, they'd treated me like prey. They'd cornered me, threatened me, thinking I would eventually just lie down and break. They never realized they weren't cornering a sheep. They'd backed a wolf into a corner. My hand reached for my phone, steady and sure. I scrolled past Louise and Thomas, past my chain of command. I went straight to the top. I found the number for Air Commodore Pemberton's office. This was a direct threat against an RAF officer on base. This was no longer a family squabble. I was reporting an imminent threat. The battle was coming, but it would be fought on my terms. The call from Air Commodore Pemberton's office came the morning of the ceremony. It was a summons, not an invitation. I walked across the base to the command building, my back ramrod straight, bracing for a reprimand. Air Commodore Pemberton stood by the window, overlooking the parade grounds. He turned as I entered, his expression serious, unreadable. "Sit down, Flight Lieutenant," he said. "Report," he commanded when I was seated, all the fear drained away, replaced by focused clarity. I delivered the report like a military briefing, factual, concise. Without emotion, I detailed the history of abuse, the pattern of manipulation, the direct threats against me and my unborn child. When I finished, the room fell silent. "I have recordings of the most recent calls, sir," I said, my voice steady. He nodded. "Proceed." I placed the small digital recorder on his polished desk. I pressed play. The toxic voices of my family filled that sacred space. Sebastian's snarling hatred. Edmund's cold, dismissive command. My mother's manipulative sobs. The general stood motionless, his jaw tightening with every recorded word. When the last recording clicked off, he walked back to the window, his back to me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned around. "Thank you, Flight Lieutenant," he said, his voice laced with something beyond formality. "Respect. You showed immense courage in gathering this intelligence." He informed me that he'd arranged for security to be present at the ceremony and had put the military police on high alert. "Your family failed to protect you," he said. "The RAF will not." Those words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was validation. It was acknowledgement from the highest authority. My pain was real. My fight was just. The tragic events unfolded exactly as I had feared. But Air Commodore Pemberton's foresight meant that when Sebastian attacked, the response was immediate and overwhelming. My next clear memory is of the sterile white walls of the Naval Hospital. The physical pain was a dull, throbbing ache. The emotional pain was a gaping wound. I had lost the baby. I had lost my family. I had lost everything on that stage. But as the fog of grief and medication lifted, a cold, hard resolve took its place. I asked Louise and Thomas to bring my laptop from the barracks. With their quiet, unwavering support, I began the real work. I transcribed every call, timestamping each threat, highlighting every admission of past abuse. The process was agonizing, but with every piece of data I logged, a sense of control began to seep back into me. I wrote a detailed chronological statement documenting every incident I could remember. My grief was the fuel, but discipline was the engine. A few days later, Air Commodore Pemberton came to visit. With him was Flight Lieutenant Rebecca Ashford, a prosecutor from the Judge Advocate General's Corps. She was sharp, intelligent, radiating both calm and formidable competence. "This is Flight Lieutenant Ashford," the Commodore said. "She requested to take your case personally." Rebecca stepped forward and offered a small, knowing smile. "I've been where you are," she said, dropping the formalities. "My family didn't believe me either." She looked me straight in the eye. "We're going to win this fight." The court-martial was held in a formal, sterile room on base that smelled of old wood and institutional polish. An RAF flag stood in the corner, its colours a stark backdrop. I walked in, flanked by Rebecca, my posture mirroring the rigidity of the flagpole. Sebastian sat at the defendant's table, dressed in an expensive suit, a smirk playing on his lips. My mother and Edmund sat in the front row. Edmund stiffly, his face a mask of indignation. My mother staring at her own hands, twisting them in her lap. I wore my service dress uniform, a suit of armor I had earned. I was not a cowering victim. I was a witness. I was an RF officer ready to perform her duty. Sebastian's lawyer began his opening statement by painting me as an unstable, dramatic, promiscuous young woman. He implied my pregnancy was carelessness, that I was an attention seeker prone to exaggeration. When it was my turn to take the stand, he came at me with carefully worded questions designed to trip me up. "Isn't it true you had a contentious relationship with your family?" "I would describe it as abusive, sir," I answered calmly. "This pregnancy, it wasn't from a committed relationship, was it?" "No, sir. I was pregnant, and I was assaulted by your client." I answered every question with direct factual simplicity. I refused to let him twist my words. The tide turned when Edmund was called as a character witness for Sebastian. He walked to the stand with unshakable arrogance. Rebecca cross-examined him with masterful deference. "Colonel Radcliffe, as a retired officer, you understand the importance of integrity and honor, correct?" "Of course," he boomed. "And you would agree that making a threat against a service member is a serious offense?" "Naturally." "Then why?" Rebecca asked, her voice still respectful but with an edge of steel. "Did you call Flight Lieutenant Ashworth and order her to handle the problem of her pregnancy and cancel the ceremony? A direct attempt to intimidate a witness and cover up a threat?" Harold's face turned purple. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Permission to play audio evidence file 3, Your Honor," Rebecca said smoothly. The recordings were the decisive blow. Jacob's hate-filled voice echoed through the courtroom. Sebastian snarling that I was a stain and promising to expose me. Edmund's cold, commanding voice calling my baby a problem and demanding I cancel. My mother's tearful, manipulative pleading. The raw, undeniable toxicity filled the air. A poison cloud that choked out all of Sebastian's lawyers' carefully constructed lies. I watched Sebastian's face, the smug confidence drained away, replaced by pale, slack-jawed shock. Air Commodore Pemberton took the stand and testified with the quiet, immense gravity of a 4-star officer. He described what he had witnessed at the ceremony, his testimony delivered in the clear, precise language of a military commander. When Sebastian's lawyer tried to cross-examine, the Commodore fixed him with a look of pure ice. "Counselor," he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room, "I have served for 30 years in this service. I know an assault when I see one. What I saw on that stage was one of the most cowardly and dishonorable assaults I have ever had the misfortune to witness." The room collapsed. The panel deliberated for less than 20 minutes. The foreman stood and delivered the verdict. On the charge of assault, this court finds the defendant guilty. The gavel slammed down with the finality of a gunshot. I didn't feel joy or triumph. There was only vast, quiet, profound relief. The nightmare was over. There was no celebration after the verdict. No triumphant dinner. I walked back to my barracks room and sat on the edge of my bunk, staring at the wall. The war was over. I had won. But I felt hollow. Justice had been served, but my baby was still gone. My family was shattered beyond repair. Rebecca found me a few hours later. She didn't offer congratulations. She just handed me a steaming cup of black coffee. "This part is normal," she said gently. "There are casualties in every war, even the ones we win. Give yourself time to grieve what was lost." My mother requested to see me before she and Edmund drove back to Cambridge. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe off base. She looked 10 years older than in the courtroom. The fight had drained her, leaving her frail and defeated. She started to cry before the waitress even brought our coffee. "Not once did she ask how I was feeling," she said. Not once did she mention the grandchild she had lost. Finally, her monologue wound down. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I know you're angry, Rosalind," she whispered, "but if you had just been a little more yielding, it never would have come to this." I looked at my mother, the woman who had given me life, and I felt no anger, only the cold ashes of profound sadness. "Mom," I said softly, "I've been yielding my entire life." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "I love you. I think I always will. But I can't live in their shadow anymore." That was the goodbye. I never saw Edmund again. But I wrote him a letter, "Sir. You taught me that honor is everything to a soldier." I chose to tell the truth, as difficult as it was, because it was the honorable thing to do. I hope one day you'll understand that honor isn't found in hiding a wrong, but in facing it. It was the final act of closing a door. My own declaration that I was reclaiming the definition of honor for myself. I submitted my request for an honorable discharge. Air Commodore Pemberton reviewed the paperwork, then looked up at me. "You have served this service with distinction, Ashworth," he said quietly. "The RAF gave me my strength, and it gave me justice, sir," I replied. "Now I need to find my peace." He nodded slowly. "Go find it, Ashworth. You've earned it." Walking out of his office into the bright Oxfordshire sun, I didn't feel like I was quitting. This was a conscious choice. For the first time, I wasn't running from a painful past. I was walking toward an unknown future. I moved to Westminster in London. I rented a small flat with a balcony overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street. It was a blank slate. My mornings began with a run through the parks of the city, waking up. I ran not because I was ordered to, but because I loved the feeling of the cool air on my face, the steady rhythm of my own feet on the pavement. I was reclaiming my body, not as a weapon, but as my own. I found profound peace in simple daily routines. The rich aroma of brewing coffee, the quiet rustle of pages in a book, visiting the city's monuments. One crisp autumn afternoon, I went to Westminster Abbey. I walked for hours among the solemn tributes to those who had served. The scale of it was humbling. I found a quiet patch of grass and placed a single white rose. It was a silent farewell to the child I never got to meet. A final acknowledgement of a life that was, however brief, a part of my own story. Captain Morales had given me a phone number for an organization called the Wounded Warrior Foundation, a non-profit helping veterans find new purpose through service. I called and started volunteering. The office ran a support group for female service members who had experienced trauma. I sat in on a few meetings, just listening. One evening, the facilitator looked at me. "Rosalind, would you like to share?" My heart hammered in my chest. But looking at the faces of the women around me, I saw not judgment, but deep shared understanding. For the first time, I told my story. The words came out haltingly at first, my throat tight with unshed tears. But as I spoke, I saw the women nodding. I saw tears of empathy in their eyes. In that moment, I realized my story had a power I never knew. It wasn't just my pain anymore. It was a mirror reflecting their struggles back at them, showing them they weren't alone. It was proof that survival was possible. My small role as a volunteer grew. I became a peer mentor, then a group leader. The wounds I carried became the very tools I used to help others stitch their own lives back together. A few years later, an invitation arrived. It was a request to be the keynote speaker at a national veterans conference. The thought terrified me. But I knew I had to do it. I walked onto that stage, not in the crisp uniform of an RAF officer, but in a simple dress. The auditorium was vast, filled with hundreds of faces. The last time I stood on a stage like this, I began, my voice clear and steady. I lost everything. I told them my story. All of it. Not with the anger of a victim, but with the calm clarity of a survivor who had navigated the darkness and found her own way into the light. This morning, I woke before the sun. I stood on the balcony of my small Westminster flat, a warm mug of coffee in my hands. I watched as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, catching the iconic dome of Parliament in the distance and setting it ablaze with golden light. I can still feel the faint scar on my abdomen, a permanent reminder of the battle I fought. But it doesn't ache anymore, it's part of my map. Proof that I was tested and I endured. I don't forget the past. But I am no longer its prisoner. I have redefined honor, loyalty, and family on my own terms. My name is Rosalind Ashworth, a warrior, a survivor, and I have finally found my own dawn. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you're on your own path of healing, I see you, and you are not alone. Tell me in the comments one thing you're looking forward to in your own new day. I would be honored to read it. If this story gave you hope, please like and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Your support helps create this space where we can all heal together.